This is Q&A, guys. So I'm open for questions. Yeah.
Two-part question. What's your opinion on the IDF for Haredi Jews today? And if your opinion is in any way that it's not adequate, what would it take to get for the IDF to be an adequate environment for Haredi Jews?
Okay, the question is whether the Israel Defense Forces is an appropriate environment for Haredi, ultra-Orthodox Jews to participate in, and if not, what would be required? I'm not going to answer the question because this is a question that requires global knowledge of Torah and global knowledge of the current circumstances of the religious community and the non-religious community, and be able to predict the consequences of one policy over another, and I'm in no position to do that. And I will share with you that I'm gravely suspicious of the vast majority of people who boldly make pronouncements about things of which they know very little. I have no opinion on the subject whatsoever. I follow the instructions of those who are responsible for the spiritual life of the Haredi community in this, as I do in everything else, in the same spirit that I would follow the most experienced and knowledgeable medical experts in medical questions. If someone asked me, what is your opinion on legalizing drugs? I would say I would be a fool to have an opinion. Yeah.
Question is, do you believe that given our several years and generations of persecution, we are predisposed to maybe mental conditions like anxiety? And if so or if not, how do we, or what's the recommendation that members of the Jewish community deal with maybe tough emotions that might evolve into anxiety or any troubling emotions in general?
It's very interesting. You both asked questions on with the preface, do you believe? This isn't a matter of faith. Your question is a question that can only be answered by statistics. And it's very, very difficult to get the statistics because you'd have to compare, let's say, predisposition to depression among, let's say, Jews generally, or a certain subclass of Jews, with who? With the Amish, with people who live in Beverly Hills, with Scottish Highlanders, and then we have to control for economic differences and educational differences and general health differences and so on and so on. I think it would be very, very, very difficult to gain any reliable statistics as whether we were predisposed to certain types of psychological weaknesses as opposed to relevant other groups. And I will make a remark, something that I learned from reading the works of Oliver Sacks. It's too narrow to look at a psychological problem or need as something broken and needs to be fixed. And what is it that fixes this? Like, let's say, a broken ankle. It's too narrow because you're not fixing an isolated phenomenon. You're interacting with someone's whole life. And the question is, what can I do to make his whole life better? And maybe focusing on fixing the broken part isn't the way to make his whole life better. Oliver Sacks stressed this by studying people with neurological conditions, usually due to accidents of some kind or disease, and how they themselves dealt with it. And some said, well, if this area has now left me, can I build a whole life out of the rest rather than fixing it? Because fixing it, number one, requires a tremendous amount of effort, concern, psychological and emotional involvement, defining yourself as broken and somehow disabled. Whereas if you build your life around something else, maybe it won't be a significant factor in the wholeness and success of your life at all. He describes a painter, a professional painter who had exhibitions, who had an injury and thereby became colorblind. And after going through some months of mourning for the loss of color, he would only go out at twilight when the colors are washed out. he decided to experiment with painting in black, white, and gray, without color. He discovered a whole new world of artistic expression, to the extent that several years later, when an operation was discovered that would have repaired his color vision, he refused to have it, because he didn't want to be taken out of this new area of artistic endeavor that he found so rich and so rewarding. So this attitude that this is fixed, this is broken, this has got to be fixed, and you're disabled is one which itself has to be questioned. It has to be, and Oliver Sacks stresses enlisting the person himself in creating a life for himself. So looking at himself, I'm the expert, he's broken, and I'm trained, and I have expertise in how to fix him. Ask him where he wants to go. Ask him what he wants to be. There's a lot more to be said about it. I'm not an expert on the subject, but having read Oliver Sacks, it opened up my mind to a tremendous field of perspective that I'd never appreciated before. I'm sure there are others who share it and who would give a much broader perspective on a question like you're raising. I mean, why am I saying it? Because when you talk about, let's say, depression for a frum Jew, and depression for, let's say, a baseball player in the New York Yankees, and depression for a Hollywood entertainer, the life of the person is so different that the way you deal with the depression is going to be enlisting the strengths of the rest of the life as part of your resources for dealing with it. And the resources are going to be very different in the three cases. So to have say, well, what is depression? We treat that this way is going to be very, very inefficient and sometimes just injurious. That's what I'm suggesting. Yeah. What else is on people's minds?
I have a question of, I think, halacha here. But I know a man whose father is Jewish. His mother converted conservative before he was born. Allegedly, this Beis Din which converted him, both the court and the rabbi were Shabbos kosher observant Jews, at least in 1980, according to the conservative movement. So I have two questions. One, if those facts are true, do we consider him to be a halakhic Jew? And the second question is, let's say one of the individuals on the Beis Din lied about being, knowingly lied, let's say they had pork and shrimp back home, would his if he was valid, his halakhic, if he's still valid as a person, but if he was validly a halakhically Jew, would he still be if someone lied?
Okay, so the question is whether a conservative conversion qualifies someone to be a halachic Jew. Now, you're specifying where the people who are involved themselves are Sabbath observant and
Kosher.
And kosher.
They keep kosher.
I'm not an expert in the laws of this case, so I'll just offer you some perspective on it. I'm not going to say yes or no. The first question would be this. Leaving aside the religious practice of the people in the group that conducted and certified the conversion, what was he converting to? What is the thought system, value system, and practice system that he's converting to? If it's under the auspices of the conservative movement, then from our point of view, he's going to have been taught things that are false. He's going to be taught things which either are wrong to believe, or he's going to be omitted things that are right to believe. So he's not converting to real Judaism. He can be sincere and all the rest. The people can be honest and sincere, but it's not Judaism, the Judaism of Moses and Hillel and Rabbi Kiva and Rashi and Tosfos, is not that Judaism that he's converting to. So it doesn't, in my mind, it doesn't get off the ground. And you put it well. I mean, if these people are members of the conservative movement, they are Sabbath observant according to the conservative movement, which means that they're violating Shabbos all the time. Same thing with kashrus. Kashrus, according to the conservative movement, from our point of view, from the point of view of Orthodox Judaism, it's not Shabbos, it's not Kad. I shouldn't say it that way. I should say there are many, many failures of Shabbos and many, many failures of Kashrus, which they don't recognize as failures. So he hasn't had an opportunity to convert to what we call Judaism. And that would be a major problem for such an idea, such conversion. Yeah, everybody else came along just to observe the show?
I got a third one.
Okay.
So I believe that if I recall correctly, there are statements in the Talmud which purport to quote the Torah that differ from the pasuk that they're actually quoting. Is this true? And if so, what does that speak about the volatility or involatility of the Torah?
Well, the question is whether there are quotations in the Talmud of verses where the text that's quoted in the Talmud doesn't match the text that's in the Torah. Well, first of all, that might be the volatility of the text of the Talmud that's in question, not the volatility of the text of the Torah that's in question. We have many, many variations in the Talmud. In fact, every page of the Talmud has on it at least 4 commentaries which are correcting the text of that page. And in the back there are more commentaries correcting the text of that page. So rather than take the text of the Torah, which is the most sacred document, and then the people who have a great position of being a scribe and they're paid to check every letter and so forth and so on, and assuming volatility of that text, we know that the text of the Talmud was itself varied over the generations. And so I would put down differences of this kind to changes in the copying of the Talmudic text with its quotations of the Torah rather than the Torah itself. And you could check this, because if you have a case where in our editions of the Torah you have one text, and in the Talmud's quote of this text of the Torah you have a different quote, you ought to be able to find the Talmud's version in some other Torah scrolls somewhere. If it was a volatility of the Torah scrolls, then you'd expect to find the Talmud's different version in some Torah scroll somewhere. But if you didn't find it in any Torah scroll anywhere, then I think the more overwhelming conclusion would be that it's the Talmudic text that varied, rather than the text of the Torah scrolls that varied. To conclude that the text of the Torah scrolls has varied, you would need evidence from within the corpus of Torah scrolls. You wouldn't infer it on the basis of quotations from the Torah scrolls. Now, there are known variations. There are something like 7 or 8 letters which are well known, and then some scholars using rare manuscripts found up to 20 or 30 letters out of over 300,000 letters. That's very, very tiny percentage. And none of them makes a significant difference in the meaning of the word in question. So if it's a question of omission of whole words or changing orders of it and so on, the copyists of the Talmud are probably the ones who introduced those variations. This is a one second. That's strange. Why did that happen? Surprised that happened. Okay. There you go. Yeah. What's on people's minds? Yeah.
Maybe I could ask about the shiur earlier today.
Sure.
So I remember we were saying that the guy that he's very black and he gives tzedakah to the tzaddik as like a conscious. He gets married as a tzaddik and he's able to enter like the very low level of olam haba. But so is that saying that that's all that it takes for him to get there? Because it seems like an easy way to get there. Just somebody just giving the tzaddik tzedakah, and does the tzaddik have to make a conscious decision to pull him up with him, or is it just the fact that he's giving him tzedakah, he associates him with the tzaddik, and therefore the tzaddik can bring up a lot of people that are associated with him in that way without ever thinking about it twice himself.
Okay, let me. I'm supposed to repeat the question for the recording, and I often, or almost always, forget to do that. We spoke earlier today about a section in Part 2, Chapter 3 of The Way of God by Luzzatto, where he says that getting into the world to come can happen where a person's own individual record is so bad that he doesn't deserve a place in the world to come at all, but someone who is in the world to come and who is very high stature there, has very great merit, can pull him in, so to speak, despite the fact that his own record wouldn't allow him to be included. So that's what Luzzatto says. And I added to that, how does that happen? I said that two things. That number one, this person may not be totally black, totally a failure. And I use the example of conscious money. Conscious money meant that a person's doing the wrong thing, gives money to charity, or in the Middle Ages would give money to the church to protect himself from any consequences of what he's doing, to show that really he's a good guy, even though he's doing the wrong thing. And he pays it off. And this is regarded as hypocrisy and dishonesty and low and crass and cruel and criminal, and it's completely discarded in any moral terms, certainly in any spiritual terms. That's the normal attitude towards, I think we call it indulgences in the Middle Ages, this kind of conscious money. Now, I wanted to suggest that from a Jewish point of view, others may disagree, but from a Jewish point of view, this isn't zero. And it isn't zero because there is a verse that says, Sofa Rasha Latzadik Umavakesh Hamiso. The wicked person looks out at the righteous person, the tzaddik, and desires to kill him. This is real evil. This is real wickedness. Wickedness that can't abide the existence of good. The existence of good spoils his world. His evil expresses itself in a desire to kill the righteous person. Well, the guy who pays conscious money isn't like that. He's giving him money. He's certainly not trying to kill him. So he's not this kind of Russia. He's not this kind of absolutely black, evil, wicked person that the Torah describes as the one who wants to kill the tzaddik. So there is some merit there. Now, the type of merit it is that he looks at the world, he looks at the various items of the world, he looks at himself in the world, considers his possibilities and his priorities. Shabbos, not for me, I'm going scuba diving. Kashrus, I like pork ends. Leave me alone with prayers, I'm not a believer in prayers. But this guy, it's good that he's in the world also. I wouldn't want the world to be without him. In fact, I want to help support him do what he does because he's a valuable part of the world. That's a genuine moral and spiritual perception. He's right about that. And he's willing to give up something to support it. So that's, number one, positive on his part, and it creates a connection to the tzaddik. Now, the tzaddik uses some of his own merit to enable this person to come into the world to come, but where? Usually, for the vast majority, you come into the world to come and you have a direct perception of God, God's presence, the shine of his presence. Ziv HaShechina, the shine of the Shechina. Right? That's the normal place in the world to come. I'm saying, because of analogies with other things, that this person gets in and he gets, so to speak, the filtered presence. He doesn't get it directly, he gets it filtered through the tzaddik that he's connected to. So you can think of it as like a translucent material that lets some light pass through. Some light passes through the tzaddik and he gets it from the tzaddik. So the tzaddik pulling him in doesn't put him in a position where everybody else is. They're getting a direct perception of God. He doesn't get that. To get that, you got to earn it. But since he's connected to the tzaddik, he can get a filtered perception of God through the tzaddik. So I think because the Ramchal himself says he's very low position, I'm explaining what the lowness could be as commensurate with what he did and the kind of credit that he had. And I think that makes reasonable sense out of it.
So it's easy to get there because it's so low. That's what it is.
That's right. It's easy to get there because it's so low. And it needs, the last part of your question was, the tzaddik has to decide to do it. The tzaddik is one who's making the decision to give up something to pull him in.
So he like, in a way, neshama makes that decision.
And then I think, I didn't say this in the shir, but that means he's making a decision, like an all matters considered decision, because he knows this person. And he knows what place in his neshama, in his soul, this appreciation of the good thing plays. You have people, for example, who are drawn to something against their will. I'll tell you this because I didn't see anybody discuss it, but there's a certain prayer that you make when the Kohanim make the priestly blessing. And the one for the last blessing talks about relating to God and God relating to you and so forth and so on, and the way you want God to respond to you. And one of the things it says there is, please make us like Joseph, who, when he wore his coat of many colors, everyone was attracted to him and loved him and praised him. Everyone liked him, everyone, with his coat of many colors. And I think to myself, gee, didn't that get him in trouble a little bit? Weren't the brothers envious of him and jealous of him, and they wanted to do him dirt, and they ended up selling him into slavery? And the Torah testifies they took off the coat of many colors because that was the thing that excited their envy. What do you mean that everybody was attracted by this and pleased with this and showed respect to this? I'm like, what? Why does the prayer say that when the verses seem to contradict it? I didn't see anybody ask the question, which probably means either there's an obvious answer somewhere or it's not a good question. But I think I figured out at least a possibility, and that is they hated him. They were jealous of him. And they were charmed by him anyway. They couldn't help it. They looked at him, and with the bitterness in their hearts, they thought, wow. And when that wow came out of their souls, they hated themselves more. What? I'm allowing him to suck me into his idolizing group. I'm allowing his charisma to affect me when I know that he's rotten in a certain way. But they couldn't help it. They couldn't help it. They were drawn in by that vision of greatness that Joseph projected. I don't think that's going to get much credit. Yeah, I feel sympathy for the tzaddik. You know why? Because I was brought up in Williamsburg. I had tzaddikim around. As a kid, I grew up with this idea that the tzaddik was special. I know better now. I know they know better than anybody else. But my childish emotions still linger with me. So I give him some money. But really, I hate myself for having those emotions. I don't think that's going to get him much credit. So it's not a question of just having the emotion. Where does it come from? The tzaddik will know this person. He'll think, I know where it's coming from. Part of him really appreciates it. And he doesn't dismiss it as childish or just charisma. He thinks, but like I quoted that Israeli politicians who will say that even though if they're not religious at all personally, but a few do actually say that the Jewish people in Israel needs to have religious Jews, because otherwise it won't really be a Jewish state. I'm not doing it, but they have to be. They have to be protected and supported, because otherwise we've lost something that's precious to the identity of the Jewish people, even if I'm not participating. That's genuine perception of something positive, rather than regretting it and laughing it off as something childish and I can't help it. So it will depend, I think, on the place that this positive appreciation plays in their general character, and that would be part of what the tzaddik would decide, which one to pull in and which one not to pull in. So it seems to me. Yeah, was noch? Yeah.
Kind of different topic, but to what extent do children have free will?
I'll tell you, to what extent do children have free will? It's a little tricky because free will is measured in a number of different dimensions. For example, how much you know plays a tremendous role in the free will that you have. For example, there may be an option open to you that you're unaware of, and instead of having 3 alternatives, there are really 4, and your free will is limited by your ignorance. On the other hand, you may think that you have 4 because you don't know the objections against one of them, which if you knew them would make it something that you would never dream of doing, so you have more because of your ignorance. So your knowledge plays a great role, and children's knowledge is, first of all, it's minimal, and second of all, what they think they know, they don't know, and a lot of things they think they know are false. So there's a free will is colored by the fact that they're living with misinformation, and that, to a great extent, trivializes their free will. Number 2, we don't hold children before the age of maturity, 13 for a boy and 12 for a girl, responsible for their actions. And the Gemara's wording is they lack das. Now, das is one of 7 or 8 intellectual words in the Hebrew language. The Hebrew language is an extremely poor language. It has a minimal vocabulary. Of modern spoken languages, maybe the smallest or one of the smallest. Don't talk to me about telephone and encyclopedia as modern Hebrew words. They're all just borrowed from other languages. And in the case of the intellect, there are many different words with many different nuances. That's very significant. Now, das is translated in different texts in a million different ways. But in our picture of how the psychology of a person works, and particularly the intellectual part, das is the connector between the pure intellectual capabilities and emotions and behavior. It's the bridge between them. It's the way in which the intellectual understanding plays a role in guiding action. So when people say, I know very smart 11-year-olds, you certainly do. But I wouldn't trust your gold bricks with them. They're very smart, but they can do stupid, foolish, self-destructive and other destructive things because their knowledge doesn't inform their action. It doesn't control their action or direct their action to the same extent. So this, I think, is the chief failure of children. They can't use what they know consistently to act in terms of what they know. And then free will in this respect grows as you grow. Every change of category has to have a cutoff point. It's going to have any legal consequences. So obviously some 14-year-olds are less mature than some 10-year-olds. But that's the problem with children's free will. And it expresses itself, some hold the position, not an inconsiderable number, hold the position that although it's 12 for a girl and 13 for a boy, you are responsible to an earthly court for your actions, but your account in heaven starts at the age of 20. So that means that vis-a-vis earthly consequences of your actions, a girl at 12 and a boy at 13 can have enough understanding that if you do this, you're reported to the authorities, then you'll be punished a certain way, you'll lose your place socially and respect and so forth and so on, you'll be held responsible, but there's not enough understanding and self-control for the heavenly account to be accorded to the person. That starts at the age of 20. So that, I think, realistically describes the maturity, the growth of maturity. Right? Now, of course, they weren't taking into account the artificially prolonged infancy called university, where that maturity is interrupted, that maturing process is interrupted, and irresponsible behavior is encouraged by the whole environment, including the professors. So, and for those you should know that I'm speaking from experience because I was a professor for 10 years, so I'm not speaking by hearsay or by reading the New York Times. Anyway, so I think that's it is a matter of degree. I don't think it has an absolute precise description, but those are some of the problems with the decisions of children. Yeah.
So you were talking about free will, and it made me think of they were talking on Shabbat about how there's like a paradox that seemingly the human mind is not capable of understanding the answer of what if a person has free will, how is it possible that Hashem knows like what you're gonna do, and how is it possible that the length, it says in Rashi that the length of the path of the spies was shortened to 40 days because Hashem knew that what they were gonna do, and he wanted to punish them less, so he miraculously made their path shorter because they traveled all around Israel, and you can't get around in 40 days, but he miraculously made it shorter because he knew they were gonna give a bad report. And then that's like a paradox on how does that mean that they don't have free will?
Okay.
But that's not my question.
Oh.
My question is that I don't even understand why that's even that it's a question that it's a paradox, because it seems like it could work where you have free will to decide what you want to do, but Hashem just knows what you're gonna do because he can see it's not future for him. He can see what you're gonna do. He knows it, but you have it's up to you to make that decision. But when I brought that up, they said no, that doesn't work. So that doesn't answer the paradox. So that I was wondering.
Well, I don't know who you were talking to, but I think it does answer the paradox. I think it does, and I know sources that say so. Well, let me repeat for the recording what we're talking about. The question that's being raised is God's foreknowledge versus free will. If God knows what you're going to do before you do it, do you have a real free choice to choose it when you choose it? And it's being suggested that you do. God knows what you're going to do by observing what you do. You put it as being outside of time, so it's not future for him. So if it's not future for him, he can see you do it.
Right.
And since he's getting his knowledge from your doing it, it doesn't put any restrictions on what it is that you choose to do.
I just remembered why they said it's not what I said
Yeah.
was the answer. Because they said maybe Hashem knows what you're going to do because he made you. So he knows how your brain works, and it's in a way that you're programmed that the way that Hashem made you, based on your circumstances, your experiences, your neshama, your brain, whatever, you're going to make this decision, and he knows you're going to make that decision because that's how you work.
Okay, so now, okay, fine. Let's put that on the table also. Their objection to this suggestion was maybe he knows the future in a different way,
Right.
and that way you wouldn't have this outcome.
Right.
So first of all, let's just stop there and say, if that's the suggestion, it's admitting that if he knows by observing you, there isn't a problem. They're admitting that that is a solution. They're just wondering whether it's the truth about how God knows.
Okay.
So it doesn't invalidate the logic of the solution. If God knows by observing you, then indeed his knowledge puts no limitations on what you do. They're just suggesting maybe he knows in some other way.
Okay.
Okay? But now the suggestion that they made, if you're reporting it correctly, doesn't help their case at all. The suggestion was made is maybe he knows what you're going to do because he knows how your brain is, and he knows how your circumstances are, and he knows that you are programmed to act in this way, and that's why he knows what you're going to do. But if that's the suggestion, notice that God's knowledge plays no role in the argument. If you're programmed to act that way, without God, you have no free will. It's a programming that's forcing you to do it. So that's not going to be an explanation of why God's knowledge is a problem for free will. That just puts it into the thing they say he knows that carries the problem all by itself. So that's not going to save the problem that we're dealing with. Now, as a matter of fact, the Rav Saadia Gaon and the Rivosh and the Akeres Yitzchak and the commentary on Pirkei Avos, Shmuel, Dvar Shmuel, and others say exactly what you said. They say that God knows what you do by observing it. What you do causes God to have the knowledge. And since what you do causes him to have the knowledge doesn't put any limitations on what you do whatsoever. And this is really the only solution. God's being outside of time plays no role. God's knowledge being in the past plays no role. The reason why we talk about foreknowledge and free will is because we intuitively think, well, if it's in the past, it's over, done, finished, chiseled in stone, untouchable, unreachable, that's constant. Now, I do A. Yesterday he knew I was going to do A. Could I do B? Doing B would mean to contradict what he knew yesterday. So that's impossible. And that's why it's a problem. The problem is because I can't do anything else other than I do. There's no alternative to what I do. The problem with God's knowledge is that it cuts off the alternative I didn't take. The problem with God's knowledge is not that it caused me to do what I did. Knowledge doesn't cause you to do anything. It's that it cuts off, Maimonides says this word for word. The problem is that it cuts off the alternative. But now, if you say that God's knowledge yesterday is because of what I do, it's my doing it when I do it that gives him his knowledge yesterday. And as you said, since he's outside of time, for him yesterday is not a problem, right? So then, if you ask, okay, in the real world, I did A. In the real world, yesterday he knew I was going to do A. But I'm asking, could I do B? I'm asking about the virtual world, an unreal world. What about the world in which I do B? Since he gets his knowledge from my action, in the world in which I do B, yesterday he knew B, not A. He knew B, because in that world he would get his knowledge from my doing B. No contradiction there whatsoever. So that's one standard solution, and it is a perfectly adequate solution. The only other approach that I know to the problem is the Rambam's approach, which is not to solve the problem, but to dissolve the problem. That's a long story, which I'm not going to go into now. It's recorded. I just did it recently. But just for those who have looked at the Rambam, I want you to know that in part 3, chapter 17 of the Guide of the Perplexed, he's discussing a certain school of Arabic philosophy, among other things, and he's talking about their shortcomings. At the end of the section, he says, and by the way, they believe that God has foreknowledge, and they believe in free will, and the little thought will show you that that is a contradiction. So the Rambam is on record that it definitely is a contradiction. And he has another way of handling it. And I think, though he doesn't say this anywhere, but I believe, because he's on record at least 5 times, maybe 7 times, in the Guide of the Perplexed, that God is not acted upon by anything else. Nothing has an effect on God. The way you described it, my action causes God's knowledge. That for the Rambam is not acceptable. If you don't accept that, then there's no way out. And therefore the Rambam says it's an absolute contradiction. And then he says, I tell you that I have another way to deal with the problem, which is to simply dissolve it by saying, we don't talk about God, so we don't talk about his knowledge.
Oh, that's what they were saying. It's because they don't accept it.
But that's a different approach. But there's nothing wrong with what you said. In fact, just 2 more little points. What you said is exactly what Lahavdol El Havdolos in Torah. Bertrand Russell was a great British philosopher in the beginning and mid 20th century. He wrote Why I'm Not a Christian. He was a real famous atheist. But he said, don't try to beat up the religious believer with this problem of foreknowledge and free will, because I tell you, all God has to do is yesterday, take a look at tomorrow. Take a look and see tomorrow. See what I do tomorrow, and then he'll know it yesterday. You say, you can't do that because you're not God. But God could do that. No contradiction in saying that he does that. It's exactly what you say. But now let me tell you something else. The words that Chazal use to describe God's knowledge of the future are words of observation. Hakol tzafui v'arshus t'suna. That's how the Mishnah describes this problem. Everything is foreseen, seen, seeing. Everything's seen beforehand, and power is given. God sees the actions of the righteous and the wicked in the future. The verb that's used in the rabbinic writings is the verb of seeing. That's observing exactly what you said. He perceives it. And that's the case. The problem of foreknowledge of free will disappears.
And contradicts Rashi, who Rashi says that God's not affected by you. That means God can't.
Not Rashi, the Rambam.
Oh, Rambam. Sorry.
Yes, that's right. Exactly. Okay. The Rambam will say it doesn't really mean that. He has another meaning for those words. I'm just pointing out that that phraseology is very much indicative, I think, of this particular solution, which many Jewish scholars have used.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Might vary philosopher to philosopher, but similar to Bertrand Russell, what deterred philosophers from religion? Like, were there any some overarching themes, principles, or beliefs that deterred a philosopher from being religious?
Well, first of all, in Western philosophy of religion is philosophy of Christianity. It's the only religion they know. So obviously, that's going to give them a very myopic picture of religion with a capital R. And there are various problems with Christianity, which, from our point of view, are genuine problems. So would they apply to Judaism or lahavdil to Buddhism or Hinduism? They don't know, and they don't care. They're writing for English-speaking Christian or post-Christian audiences for whom that's the only game in town. So that's what makes their writings interesting. Some have problems of contradiction within the religious doctrines. The problem of evil is supposed to be a terrible problem. And some have epistemological problems. Some have what they would think of as definitional problems. If you can't define what God is, the concept of God, then you don't know what you're talking about. And to say that you believe there's nothing that you believe in because it has no content. Another problem. And they're various, and they work from the point of view of the general philosophy of the philosopher who's doing the job. If he's a believer in science, so he says the scientific method can't reveal it, so therefore it can't be real. I mean, there are all these kinds of things. But it's an open field, like everything else in philosophy is an open field. Almost nothing is agreed upon in philosophy. And if you think I'm being too doctrinaire, I give you a challenge. There's something called the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, free online, written by real experts in the field, run by the Stanford University Philosophy Department, which is a fine department. And just take out an essay on any subject in philosophy and read the article on that subject, and you'll have, there's this view and this view and this view, and these guys say this against this, and these guys say this and this against this, and then future progress, well, maybe we'll clarify this, and maybe something else will come up, and there's very, very little that's settled in philosophy. So, it's not a touchstone for anything. I use it only in this way, that if somebody says position A is illegitimate, it's invalid because it's refuted by contemporary thought. If I can find one school of philosophy that believes it, that it is refuted by contemporary thought, some say yes and some say no. At that point, you can't rule it out. So I use it defensively to show that it can't be ruled out. But I would never use philosophy as a way of verifying that something is true, because there are always people competing who will disagree with the arguments that you use.
Nobody has a question? I remember I was listening to Shiur, and it was talking about the Perush of the Zer Shimshon, and talking about Moshe Rabbeinu when he was in the river, and there was a machloket of whether he should be saved. The angels, there was a machloket of whether he should be saved. Like they were saying, why should he be saved and other people die? And the answer, there was 3 rabbis that were arguing. One of them said that it's because the Malachim saw that he's going to sing Shira to Hashem. One of them said that it's because he's going to be responsible for Matan Torah. According to the Zer Shimshon, the answer was because he was going to do korbanot, when he was going to ask Pharaoh to go do sacrifices for the Jews and then do korbanot. So that goes back to this retroactive knowledge. It's like a knowledge that's used retroactively to save him in like a court case, but something that happened in the future, that he was going to do in the future. But does that mean that we said that Hashem can yesterday, he can see what you did today. Right. So, and the Malachim also, I guess they have that knowledge. But does that mean that they can see different possibilities of if he's not saved, how the world is going to be? If he's saved, what he's going to do? And they could see like different entire worlds.
You're right. You're asking a very good question. Let's see if I can summarize it for the recording easily. Someone says, shall we save his life or not? And an answer is given, well, we can see that in the future he's going to do X. That's a good reason for saving his life now. So the query is, what do you mean you can see that he is going to do X? You're trying to decide now whether to save him.
Right, exactly.
If you decide not to save him, he's not going to be there to do X.
Exactly.
Right.
That's why I thought of that. Because
Right.
obviously,
Okay. Good. So you're very good. So
obviously, if he's gonna do it, that means that you're gonna save him. There's no point of the machloket.
correct. Listen, Rabbi Tatz wrote a book on free will, and this is in that book. He said it to Yishmael, but it's the same thing with Yishmael, because they said, how can you save him when he was thrown under the bush? Right? How can you save him, the Malachim said, because his great-grandchildren are going to oppress your children, right? And they're using it as an argument not to save him. So, and it's just as you said, if you don't save him, they're not going to do that.
Right.
So you can't use that as information to make the decision. And he says all it means is that it's hypothetical. It's not I see that he's going to do it. Rather, I see that if he's saved, he's going to do it. And then, as you point out, that means you see possibilities. Yes, you can see possibilities. After all, those are also facts. If I give him the bribe, he'll lie. If I don't give him the bribe, he won't lie. Both of those are true. Only one will really happen. But both of them are true because I know him. I know what he'll do. So here we're saying, I can see that if I save him, this is going to happen.
So that sounds a little bit like the programming, because a bribe is kind of like a programming.
Well, this is a problem in philosophy. It's called middle knowledge. Alvin Plantinga wrote about this at great length. Knowing a conditional about free will. Can you know what would happen if he would make a free choice? What gives you that knowledge? Where does that knowledge come from? Okay, it's very described in philosophical circles. I don't know of any resolution to how you understand this kind of knowledge of what would happen if a free choice would be made. But that's what's being taken for granted. But the point, your logic is correct, that you have to say what they know is if he is saved, this is what he will do. Not that I will know that he will do it, because then the question of saving it wouldn't be a live question. That's the logic there is 100% correct.
Okay, thank you.
You're very welcome. Rabbi Tatz wrote a book on free will. It's a very good book. If you're interested in free will, you should take a look there. Yeah.
Every generation has its challenges. Sometimes I've heard this question phrased, what's the biggest challenge? I don't like the word biggest. What do you think are particularly important challenges?
Okay, I like your question, and I think I would suggest to you another way to ask it. It may not be big in any measurable sense of big, but it may be the one that carries most significant consequences. My oldest son works on problems of technology, and he's in touch with many of the leaders of the generation, and many of them have said that the most consequential challenge that we face is the appropriate use of technology. There's a long story, and it would take me 6 weeks to do it every day. I'm not doing that now. I'm telling you that, but his example is this. The Midrashim describe Esther in the palace of Achashverosh, her dedication that she had 7 maids, one for a different day of the week. So when Shabbos is, she only ate beans with the palace filled with all luxuries. She only ate beans because that was the only thing she guaranteed was kosher. Her dedication and the fact that she obeyed Mordechai at great risk to herself, and she obeyed him. She had many, many virtues and many, many great spiritual accomplishments. Still, when Mordechai tells her to go in and plead with the king against the decree of Haman, and she balks for reasons that I can't go into now, he says to her, if you don't go into the king, you and your house will be destroyed. The Jews will be saved some other way, but you'll be destroyed. So the question is raised, what do you mean she'll be destroyed? Okay, this is something she should do, and if she doesn't do it, she's doing wrong and she's failing. Right. What about all the other good things she's doing? Don't they count? Yeah, they count. They count all right, but this is needed now for the need of the hour. And that being the case, if you don't do this, you've sacrificed your place. That doesn't mean she won't get reward for the good things she did, but this is more important in the sense that it controls crucial outcomes. And here they feel that the danger for spirituality inherent in current technology, the schmutz is schmutz, the degraded stuff, but the control of your mind, the lack of your ability to focus, the exposure of universal non-Jewish values and ideals and reactions and perceptions, which become taken for granted and second nature, and that the response to that is the major challenge for that reason for the generation. So that kind of judgment can be made, and it's crucial to be made because there's a perception of the consequences. Rav Moshe Feinstein in America in the 30s, 40s had a principle for himself and for others who were influenced by him: no compromise with the laws of Shabbos. And in particular, he made a rule: no early minyanim Shabbos morning. People who daven their early minyan weren't doing it to daven nates, have exquisitely more precious davening. They were davening early Saturday morning so that they could go to business and work on Saturday. They didn't want to just not daven because they're Jewish, and davening's important, but they had to work. They couldn't keep Shabbos. They decided they weren't going to keep Shabbos. So these minyanim were their conscious money. I did go to daven. I'm going to work in business, but I pay them. He said, no, we shouldn't have that. Was it important to have no early minyanim in Litta? Not at all. Here, because of this breakdown of Shmir Shabbos, and the fact that Shabbos he felt was something which was a wall holding the Jewish people together, there had to be no compromises there. There could be compromises elsewhere, but no compromises there. So that's a judgment of what the dynamic of your circumstances are, what the consequences will be. Not the abstract value of the mitzvah, whether legally it's more important but where we're sitting, this is a crucial mitzvah. Okay.